Good morning, afternoon, or good night, whichever it might be, whenever you're watching this video. This is Dr. Stringer, and this time we're talking about the role of police. It's a pretty straightforward subject. Some of you might already know a lot of what we're going to talk about since you're criminal justice majors, and others of you might have been informed more by the media and might be lower classmen, sophomores and juniors, and maybe don't know these things. So, with that said, we're going to talk a little bit about this. So, a few questions. Like I say, I usually throw these out there at the beginning, and then students do kind of a group discussion about them. But anyway, here's a couple of questions for you all to think about as you're doing your readings and as you're preparing for your tests. Why these things might be important. And to think about them as you're doing your readings. And, of course, if you have any questions, let me know, and we can talk about them some more. So, police officers serve three main purposes. They spend their time doing three main things. The first being law enforcement, the second being order maintenance, and the third being service. Contrary to popular belief, police officers actually spend the least amount of their time actually enforcing the law. And so, when you think about order maintenance, this is things like dealing with, traffic, or maybe directing traffic to maintain order there, dealing with loud music complaints, or disorderly people, or possibly even public intox. Service might be, those things that police officers their job doesn't traditionally include them doing, like maybe helping someone to change a flat tire, or helping get a cat out of the tree, although that's traditionally reserved for the fire department because they have the ladders and everything. But anyway, so those are just some examples. And then law enforcement, as you can probably imagine, is enforcing the law, arresting people for, shooting people and things like that. Anyway, so I think I talked about a couple of lectures ago about how police are kind of the gatekeepers to the criminal justice system, and they determine kind of who will be entered into the criminal justice system and who won't. But what I didn't mention before is that they give meaning to the law. Without the police, laws are just really words on paper, and they really have no effect whatsoever unless you have someone to enforce them. And so one local example is the Kennesaw gun law, right? Those of you that don't know, Kennesaw has a law that you're supposed to have a gun in every house. Everybody that lives in the city of Kennesaw is required to have a gun. And another example that I like from Virginia is they have some, and you can Google dumb laws from different states, and they all have some dumb laws that, they've come up with over the years. But there's a city in Virginia, I think it's Franklin, Virginia, where it's illegal for a woman to drive down Main Street unless her husband is walking in front of her and waving an orange flag. There's also another law against beating your wife on the courthouse steps on Sunday, which I always thought was really peculiar that it was just limited to Sunday and on the courthouse steps. Anyway, and then Virginia has another law which you might not know of either, which is a state law, which is actually prohibits what is known as cohabitation. I forget what the exact word is they use it for. Lewd and lascivious cohabitation, which is essentially an intimate couple living together without being married. So if you live with your girlfriend or boyfriend and you're not married, then you could be in violation of this. I say these things and give you all these examples of these laws to say that they're never enforced. The police don't enforce the Kennesaw gun law. The women driving down Main Street in Franklin, they're allowed, they do it without their husband, waving an orange flag. The courthouse step thing, I don't know exactly how much that would get enforced anyway, because that's still, beating your wife would still be illegal under state law, so, that would probably get enforced under the state law. And then the cohabitation law, I've never seen or heard of anyone ever being arrested or anything for that, because the police don't enforce it. And this gets into discretion a little bit too, because police officers have discretion. Not only do officers have discretion, but administration has discretion. So the chief can say, well, we're going to start enforcing this cohabitation law. We think this is important, and people shouldn't be living together unless they're married, or something like that, and so they have discretion to enforce it or not. What they can't do is enforce a law that doesn't exist, so they can't make things up, but they can choose to not enforce laws. And there have been some instances, particularly when it comes to like marijuana possession and things like that, where it, could be illegal under state law, but the police, choose not to enforce it. And of course, that varies across different jurisdictions. Depends on what their SOPs are. SOP is Standard Operating Procedure, for those of you that don't know. It's one of my acronyms you'll probably hear me use. Anyway, so this is just a little chart, and I think this is from your textbook, that kind of shows how police officers really spend their time, and you can see that they really are spending the vast amount of time handling patrol and non-criminal calls for service. Although this does vary, you can see that there's a little bit of differences between the different departments, between Cincinnati and Wilmington, Delaware, that they're doing different things. But for the most part, they're not really handling too much crime. So this can lead to selective law enforcement, as I was talking about, and discretion. Officers kind of choose how they want to spend their time. I already gave you all the example of arresting the elderly for bingo. That would be an instance of zero tolerance, and we'll talk more about that when we get to discretion. But officers get to select kind of how they're going to deal with citizens, whether they're going to use force or not, what amount of force, even though they have pretty strict guidelines on how they're going to do that. And an agency has some discretion as to what use of force policies they're going to enact, how they're going to train their recruits, how they're going to discipline officers, how they're going to organize and deploy their resources across the different places. Are they going to police the entire city equally, or are we going to maybe focus on some hot spots and stuff? We're going to enforce all crime equally, or we're going to focus on the more violent crime or the drug crime and things. And obviously this, really fluctuates across place with the politics of the place and the people, public demand for things, right? So that's an important thing. Police officers make the decision to arrest people sometimes. And so the seriousness of the offense is really the most important thing. Your book lists a bunch of other stuff, offender's mental state, criminal record, whether there's a weapon involved, availability of the complainant, and that goes into effect a lot of times when there's some sort of assault, even a sexual assault, because if you don't have a victim to testify, it's very difficult to get a conviction, although most states, although Georgia is not one of them, I found out recently, but in Virginia, if the police come to a report of a domestic assault, then they have to make an arrest if there's probable cause to do so under state law. They don't have any discretion to not arrest the person involved. Then that matters with the amount of danger involved and, any limitations on the command discretion, like, or maybe a lot of departments have now said that police officers have no discretion when it comes to arresting drunk drivers. If you catch someone who's intoxicated, you must arrest them because they don't want that person to be let go and then they go get in an accident and kill somebody down the road. You notice I skipped over the second one there. The second one is actually not in your textbook, but it's one that I think is very important, and I would argue that a lot of police officers think it's very important, and that's demeanor. And it's one that I like to bring up to teach students about too, because chances are some of you will interact with police officers throughout your lifetime. Some of you might go on to become police officers and realize what I'm talking about, and then some of you might not, but I want to bring up demeanor because this really impacts things. If you have a person if you're calm and collective and being normal and not being aggressive towards this officer, that's usually going to get you a little bit further than being aggressive and combative and difficult. I'm not saying it always will. I had to actually, so here's a little side story that I have. I had to actually de-escalate a state trooper one time as he came and started yelling at me. He had pulled me over, and for those of you that don't know, Dr. Stringer likes to drive a little quickly. And I was in the inside lane on the interstate, so he gets up and tries to pull me over. And so I slowly made my way over to the right shoulder and pulled over, and he came up and started yelling at me that I didn't pull over on the left shoulder and everything. And I'm like, well, I've always been told to pull over on the right side of the road. And so, by me remaining calm, he eventually kind of chilled out a little bit too, which is very odd for you to have to de-escalate a police officer. It's usually supposed to be the other way around. But anyway, so he's going on and on about, well, I never told you to pull over to the right side and all this. And all it was I was in the left lane, so I guess I could have pulled over faster if I'd have pulled over on the left shoulder. But, for multiple reasons, you're not supposed to pull over there. Usually the left shoulder is smaller, so there's less room. Traffic is usually going faster over there, and then you have a lot more room on the right side of the road. And I actually did go back and look, and it does actually say that in the Department of Motor Vehicles manual that you should pull over to the right. But anyway, I say this, is kind of how demeanor is important. And of course, I could have gotten all huffy and puffy with him too, and we could have both sat there and argued, but that was not really going to help my situation. And I think, if I recall correctly, I might not have gotten a ticket. And so when officers have discretion to not give you a ticket or to give you a ticket, if you're not being unpleasant, then you're more likely to get let off with a warning. And so keep this in mind, because police officers deal with people on a regular basis who are very unpleasant. And so, just being normal and professional can actually get you a long way. And so, there's some offenses that they're not going to have any, discretion at. If you rob someone or murder someone, then it doesn't really matter how nice you are to the officers. You're going to go to jail, and you should, right? But just think about this and realize that sometimes the way that you behave is the officers might mirror how you behave. And they get really nervous when people are being aggressive and acting like that, because usually what happens is before an officer gets assaulted, they get yelled at. And so people who are calm and collective and, yes, sir, officer, here's my license and registration, they sometimes, shoot people, but, those people that are already being aggressive and things, that is a big predictor of future violence or violent propensities, and it makes officers on guard, and it leads to other things. So just keep that in mind. So, crime control. Why is crime control important? Well, we really want the police to control crime, right? They're supposed to be stopping crime and making the world a safer place and everything, right? This is a really controversial issue because it's really actually hard to prevent crime. Like, they can go and arrest the people after the fact and put the little chalk line around the body of the person and all that good stuff. But it's not really that easy to identify criminals. Criminals don't walk around with a T-shirt that says, I'm a criminal. And so what'll happen is, as we saw in New York with the stop and frisk, they might just try to control everyone, or just certain demographics, which we saw in New York with the stop and frisk issues, where they were pretty much just stopping everyone who was black or brown and frisking them and seeing if they had drugs or guns, and then if they did, they were taking them to jail, and if they didn't, they just let them go. Obviously, this is unconstitutional, and they should not have been doing that. And we'll talk about stop and frisk in a couple of chapters when we get to that, so I don't want to dwell on it too much right now. But as I said before, I think another big thing is police officers don't have any control over the major conditions that cause crime, which leads to this, kind of difficulties. They don't have any control over poverty or unemployment or people having good role models or many of these other components. They don't have any control over what the courts do and how they sentence people once they are arrested, which leads to a lot of frustration on the part of police officers, because they end up arresting the same people and then the people get let go, and they really don't like that. And then the difficulties in measuring crime are also an issue, right? And we talked about the dark figure of crime, I think, last week, and how crime's really just measured by arrests. There's a bunch of crime that we don't know about. One thing that comes up in this part of the chapter, and I want to make sure that you all know, and it's a pretty straightforward thing, and that is this difference between these different things known as incapacitation and deterrence. So when you're deterring someone from committing a crime, you have right over here, you have, deterrence would be effective here. You have people that are standing there that are, not committing crimes, right? And the police are watching them, and so they're not committing a crime. Then you have these people over here that are just not committing a crime, and there's no police there because they're not criminals, so they're not going to commit crimes. Then you have these people over here who the police are there, and they're still committing crimes. And so this really illustrates a difference in what is known as deterrability across people. There are some people who are not going to commit crimes regardless of what you do, regardless of whether they're being deterred or not, whether there's police there or not. And then there's this other group that's, they'll not commit crimes if they think they'll get caught. And then there's this third group that they just don't care. They don't care that the police are there. They're going to commit crimes anyway. And so this is kind of this issue of deterrability. Now, incapacitation is a completely different thing than deterrability, and I don't want you all to get that mixed up. But essentially, incapacitation is when you take away someone's ability to commit a crime. So many people argue that when people are locked up and they're put in jail or prison, that they're incapacitated. They can no longer commit a crime. And there's some logic to that, I suppose, because they can no longer commit any crimes in the society, right? And so they're incapacitated from committing crimes outside of the prison, but they can still commit plenty of crimes while they're inside prison and jail, and many inmates do. So you think about maybe if I was to handcuff somebody, if we had a student here and I handcuffed them and put them in my chair, well, they would be largely incapacitated, right? Although they could still probably spit on somebody, which would be a crime, right? And so this is a lot of what corrections officers will do with inmates is, you try to incapacitate them. Clearly they're not being deterred, so you incapacitate them. And they have these wonderful restraint chairs that they put them in, and they'll put a bag over their head to prevent them from spitting and all of these other things. And so that's incapacitation. Deterrence is just not committing a crime because you don't want to get caught. So they're two completely different things. Police officers do have the ability and the authority to use force, and we'll talk about this much more as we get through the semester. I know it's probably a very interesting topic to you all, given all the media attention. And it's unique from most all other occupations. There's no other occupation where people are allowed to shoot other people, with the exception of the military. And they have a variety of tools, and they're allowed to use force to protect in two main instances. And you should probably remember this. They can use force to protect themselves or others from harm, and they can use it to gain compliance in order to effect an arrest. So if someone is under arrest and they're resisting, the police are allowed to use force to gain compliance, as well as, of course, protect themselves. So these are the two main times when police officers are allowed to use force. So the police, they end up having, kind of this interesting job where when something's not happening that's right, and something has to be done right away, who do we call? It's like the Ghostbusters. I don't know if you've watched the Ghostbusters, but who are you going to call? Not the Ghostbusters, because we don't really have the Ghostbusters, but the police. If there's something that's happening that should not be happening, like a gas station robbery, a neighbor threatening another, traffic lights not working, dog on the loose, whatever, people tend to call the police, right? It can't wait until some future time to resolve this issue. You can't say, okay, well, they're robbing the gas station, we'll take their picture and then take it down to the magistrate office and something later on. It's something that has to be fixed right now. And the police may use force or may not use force to resolve these issues, to get the people to be compliant. And some of these things are criminal, but most of the things that they're called to deal with are not criminal. Police spend an inordinate amount of time, especially around here, just writing incident reports from traffic accidents. So take that as you will. But they are available 24 hours a day and are just a phone call away. And one of the few services that we have that are like that, right? So in trying to balance the three main things that police do, law enforcement, order maintenance, and service, there are what are known as different policing styles. And James Q. Wilson wrote this book on the policing styles, varieties of police behavior. He's also the person that wrote Broken Windows Theory, for those of you that have read that and taken theory. But his theory essentially puts forward this idea that some departments are going to emphasize more than others. Some departments might focus more on order maintenance and service, whereas others might focus more on law enforcement. And, sometimes the lines can be kind of blurry, right? So in the instance of a loud music complaint, that's really kind of an order maintenance type of thing, right? You're just trying to get them to, turn the music down or whatever. But if they actually end up writing a citation to the person for having loud music, then that brings in more of, law enforcement, right? They're actually providing a service to the other neighbors by getting these neighbors to turn down the music. So it can kind of blur the lines between that. Sometimes there can be kind of a conflict between those roles, particularly when you're thinking about maybe your service or your order maintenance and the law. You think about, maybe people are drinking and that's against the law, and the police have this zero tolerance policy that we must enforce the law. And even though these people are not really hurting anybody, and nobody seems to mind that some people are maybe drinking and they're, I don't know, maybe underage. I don't know, that would never happen on a college campus or anything. But anyway, he identified three main policing styles, one being the legalistic. And so the legalistic department would enforce the law to a T. They'd have zero tolerance pretty much. And of course, these departments have a whole lot of arrests. And that's what their main focus is on, writing tickets and making arrests. Your watchman style department, they're more focused on maintaining order. And so they'll make arrests if they need to, but they're more just hey, turn the music down, let's just, move on with life and whatever. If I have to come back here, then I'm writing you a ticket, right? And so maintaining order within the city, the loud music. They might actually try to police signs of disorder too, right? Like maybe homelessness and things like that. But they're not necessarily going to go out and arrest all the homeless people, but they might have some other types of methods to go and try to maybe even help the homeless people in order to maintain order and control this disorder within their community. And in the service-oriented departments, they're very much into citizen satisfaction. You'll really see these with like rural police departments and the rural sheriff's offices because they're elected and everybody knows each other. So the sheriff doesn't want to be disliked by a lot of the people that live there because they'll get voted out of office. So he's very much so into citizen satisfaction. I had a cousin who lived in North Carolina, and he got arrested for a DUI in rural, I think it was like Gates County, North Carolina. And after he was arrested, the sheriff actually drove him home, after his 4-hour sobering up period, which I thought was, very interesting and very nice of him, In most other jurisdictions, if you get arrested, they'll give you a ride to jail, but you're on your own when it comes to getting home from there. But anyway, so just a few myths and misconceptions about the police and the role of police. I know a lot of people have watched CSI, and so we try to say, no, we don't talk about CSI in class. But I like this little graph here that shows some of the stuff from CSI. So in real life in Miami, there's 29 well-trained police officers in the CI unit. They're a fairly cohesive unit. But on CSI, officers work together to investigate crimes, often dining together and discussing cases. And CSI comes closest to reality there because they're kind of friends and whatnot. But when it gets into the actual forensics analysis, so in real life, in about 5 to 10% of cases, they actually find evidence that they can use to test for DNA. But in CSI, they find it 100% of the time. And then even after they perform, these forensic tests, how often are they conclusive? Well, in real life, only about 30% of the time are these tests really conclusive. However, on CSI, they are 100% of the time. And this has led to something called the CSI effect that your courts professors might talk to you a little bit about, where juries are not wanting to convict people without seeing this, conclusive data with 100% of DUI or 100% of DNA analysis is conclusive and things like that, and that's just not the way it is in the real world. But people see that on CSI and think that that's the way it is. Of course, you're a criminal justice major, so you know better. But anyway, that's about all I have for the role of police for today. So I will pick up next week with you all, and I hope you all have a good week. And don't forget to work on your quizzes and your discussion boards. Okay? Bye.